I'm Michael Bungay-Stanier. This is Change Signal. This is the podcast where we cut through the blather and the BS and the noise to find the good stuff that works in change. If you're a transformational leader and you're seeking modern change mastery, this is where we hold awake for the old ways and we welcome in the new. A few months ago on LinkedIn, I came across an article with a title I wish I had taken for myself. It's 2025 and change management is dead. And of course, that is kind of the heart of this podcast, which is, look, whatever change management was is a joke. I mean, what's changing and what are we managing? We're deluded if we think change management is still a thing. It might have been in 1984, but it's not in 2025. So I wanted to get Carolyn Kealey on the line and dig into just what it means if change management is truly dead. If you've ever had doubts about the ProSci ADKAR model, well, this is going to be juicy. Carolyn's an executive facilitator and trainer with a focus on change and leadership and communications. This is a punchy, provocative, delightful conversation. Carolyn, welcome.
Thanks so much, Michael. Great to be here.
It is great to be here. I'm interested in this conversation. When did you feel the call to change and transformation and change leadership and change management? When did you kind of get into this whole game?
Interesting. Well, I have been in practice about 25 years. My business results map started really in strategic communications. And over the years, I did a bunch of projects mainly around organizational communications. And at some point, about 10, 15 years in, I realized that most of these communication assignments were really change problems in disguise. And I felt that wasn't very satisfying because I didn't have access to the right levers to make real change. So, for example, you could totally appreciate you can communicate until you're blue in the face about a new IT system or a reorg, but it's not going to get you where you're going unless you have those change management, change leadership components at play. So that's where I shifted into now mostly a practice around change leadership through a detour of change management. And so I did do the ADKAR ProSci training, which is sort of the de rigueur trip or detour that most practitioners do, and found that, how shall we say, unsatisfying at the time, and now increasingly alarming the degree to which people hold on to that as a life raft.
Yeah. I mean, let's dig into that because this is something that you point to in the article we've referenced, which we'll put in the show notes as well because it's a great agent provocateur, I think.
Thank you.
And you're kind of like, ADKAR, it doesn't quite work, certainly these days.
Right.
Why don't you give us a really quick summary of what that is, and then let's have a look at it and talk about why isn't this getting traction anymore?
Okay. So ADKAR is probably the most commercially available change methodology out there, certainly in North America, and put out by a company called ProSci. ADKAR is like the centerpiece model, as you know, which stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And the big idea is that you must go through these steps in that order. So it's a do not pass go until you go through that.
Right.
So you can see there's something kind of deliciously seductive about that. It's okay, great. This is a fit for purpose model that I can just use across different changes. And that's great. I would say in practice, what to me really killed ADKAR was COVID.
Right.
Because in practice, the reality is many of the changes that we're dealing with, certainly in today's context, we don't desire. And therefore, that model doesn't quite pass muster. Also, from my perspective, coming from a communications lens, it's quite weak in the area of communication and assumes, in fact, a basic premise that I think doesn't exist anymore, which is that you know what the thing is that's changing.
Right.
And so when I think about the leaders I work with, that's the fundamental issue, is they know something is changing, but the quality is different. It's more emergence, it's more disruption, it's more chaotic, as opposed to a nice, tidy, planned change.
I mean, you've hinted at some of this already, but what's fundamentally shifted in the experience of organizational life these days?
Right.
When you look at it and you go, I've been doing this for 2 decades, closing in on 3 decades. It was like this. It's not like that anymore.
Exactly.
What's different now? What's shifted?
The first thing, as I mentioned, is that we used to think about planned change, where we knew the thing that we were talking about, typically IT change or reorg or a merger or something like that. And now the essential quality of change that leaders are grappling with is more around disruption. It's more emergent. And usually, certainly in my practice, it's much more clear what we must leave than it is what we are going to.
Right.
So that's one of the first things. We're kind of co-creating and figuring things out as we go in a more iterative fashion.
Yeah.
We used to think in terms of kind of fixed organizational systems, and now I think we're in a world that's much more fluid, again, with that idea of emergence. And so it's not so much fixed structures, it's more fluid systems that are evolving. For one thing, in terms of fixed structures, one little anecdote I would notice and would love to see if you've had a similar experience is most of my clients are still hungry for the org chart, but the minute the org chart is done, it's no longer relevant.
Exactly. No, I
Yeah.
think org charts have always been, at best, adjacent to the reality of how the things work. And nowadays it feels, as you said, that fluid or liquid is a nice metaphor, which is org chart tells you something, doesn't really tell you how power and influence works in an organization.
Totally. That's it. Yeah, and that's my sense, is that really what we need to do is work in the white spaces between the org chart rather than get obsessed with the org chart and what version are we on the org chart.
Yeah.
Another big shift that I see is that we used to think about the burning platform. That was an expression coined by Daryl Connor, who I had the pleasure of studying under, and I think is absolutely still very relevant as a leader and source of wisdom in change.
If the burning platform idea is new to you, Carolyn's referring to this insight that it takes a crisis, maybe a catastrophe, for change to happen. Its roots are actually in a real event, the Piper Alpha oil rig disaster, which was in the North Sea in the late 1980s. And it was terrible. An explosion and a fire ripped through the rig, and workers faced this impossible choice, really. Stay on the platform and almost certainly die in the flames, or jump 150 feet into freezing, oil-slicked, burning water and hope for rescue.
At this point, I think, we're crispy fried. We don't need a burning platform. We are in a time of change overload, of chaos, of profound disorientation. And if anything, what we need are certainty anchors. This is what the teams I work with are craving is, okay, what can I hold on to be true? That is sort of quite a different quality around the experience of change.
Yeah.
We used to think about being resilient. That's another perhaps overdone word in my estimation. And so in my mind, you think about resilience as bouncing back. So you were normal, you go into disorder, and then we want people to snap back.
Yeah.
And what I observe, certainly when I facilitate team sessions, is that this word has almost become weaponized. People resent being told, just suck it up, buttercup, and be resilient.
Right, exactly. It's code for just keep working and work harder.
Exactly. Power through.
Yeah.
I think now what we really need and what organizations are craving is to be really reimagining ourselves and to be in this kind of model of regeneration. And so if you think more like a startup mentality, that it's fine, we had a successful business at some point, but now we've got to evolve, which is not that we were doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And then I would say lastly, in my particular area of interest around communications and change communications, we used to see communications as a function. So this is somebody's domain and there's a fence around it. And now I think we see communication as a process, and we need leaders to be equipped to communicate effectively. To establish, as you use that metaphor so beautifully, to establish the signal through the noise and to have clarity and solidarity of intent. And so ultimately, the game has changed while we were all busy getting used to perfecting the old game.
Damn it. I mean, Carolyn, you do a lot of work with senior leaders in this space. When you're talking to them about this, How do you not have them just stick their fingers in their ears and go, la, 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 it's too hard, it's
Yes.
too messy? I mean, you keep banging on about emergence, but there's no certainty in emergence. It's just ambiguity and kind of anxiety. How do
Yes.
you help people move to a place where, if there's a single metaphor going through all of this,
Mm,
is increased fluidity and increased ambiguity?
right. This is a great question. Well, for one thing, I think the stance of coaching works especially well. And so that's something that I learned in part through you,
Well,
Michael.
thank you. That's
Uh,
the perfect answer. We'll just linger here. No.
and what I find absolutely fascinating is a pattern that reemerges time after time. And a lot of it has to do with asking good fundamental questions and then letting people sort of experience that actually we don't quite have an answer to this yet, and that's okay. But we
Yeah,
need to then figure it out. So, for example, when I get called in and we're doing transformation or modernization, and I'll ask, okay, what is that? What is so interesting is that leaders either can't express it, or even more scary is a group of executives, you find out that they each have a different
right.
interpretation of what it means, because the facilities person thinks it's all about facilities and the IT guy thinks it's all about IT. And so what you see is that there is a lack of shared meaning.
Right.
And then that becomes quite clear in sort of holding up a mirror to say, okay, well, if we don't have that clarity of intent, that shared meaning at a leadership level, we have no hope
Yeah.
of this working across the organization. So we better slow down in order to speed up. And the first thing I do is to work with teams to really crystallize a simple, essential statement of intent.
Uh-huh.
And that way, the metaphor that I use often is that we are in the age of permanent white water and you're in your kayak, of which the first rule, I don't know if you're a kayaker, Michael, but the first rule in kayak class is that you got to learn to see your world upside down,
Uh-huh.
right? And you accept that there are rocks and there are waves. So you're going to move forward and zig and
Perfect.
zag in an unpredictable way, but you can have the will to get there.
Yeah.
And that seems to work, but it is a process of letting go of the old model once it's clear it's not working, and then having the sense of clarity that there is a different way to work through this. And that doesn't have to be an identity crisis. As a leader, as opposed to working in a world where you know everything and you have the power and control,
Yeah.
now the stance is you're the leader, you have clarity and courage in asking questions as to where we should go.
I'm not much of a kayaker, but I have done a few times. And I do think of the Olympic kayak racing that you see.
Yes,
So you've got the very definition of emergent chaos, which is whitewater. I mean, it is
exactly.
utterly unpredictable. And you know that there are gates that you have to get through. Your focus from the start line is, I need to get to the first gate and I need to get through that successfully. And then I
Exactly.
need to reorient to find my way to the second gate and manage the bumps and the swirls and the rocks and the currents that are there. And then you get to the second gate. And then you go, right, now I need to get to the third gate. And you're in trouble if you're thinking about the fourth gate, when in fact the second gate is the thing you need to be focusing on.
Right, totally. And I think also you're in bigger trouble if you're going to get pissed off that there are gates and rocks and water, because this is what you signed up for.
That's
And
right.
so this is what I observe is just even to normalize the chaos
Yeah.
and the turbulence and to say it's okay. That's what we're doing, in the same way as if you're an emergency physician, there's going to be blood on the floor. That's
Yeah.
fine. That's what it is to be doing
Right.
emergency surgery. But I think many of the leaders I work with grew up in an era of what I call erosive perfectionism. They want everything to be buttoned down.
Mm.
And so the idea of imperfection and progress and iteration doesn't come naturally.
You'll find Carolyn on LinkedIn. That's Carolyn with an I, and Kealey, Kealey. And her firm's website is resultsmap.com. Resultsmap.com. So if I'm a leader or if I'm a change leader, like
Mm.
that's distinguish the two. There's something about being in the C-suite, which is I know where you spend some of your time.
Yes.
There's something about just being a transformational leader, meaning you've been tasked one way or another to make something happen.
Yeah.
What needs to be unlearned?
Right. That's a great point. So I think what has to be unlearned, if we go back to our original point about ADKAR, is we have to unlearn the idea of there being a recipe or a roadmap that your job is to expose the roadmap.
Right.
And so that you shift gears, that you are now the compass and there is no map. And that's okay.
Right.
We're looking for a sturdy leader who is able to set a clear direction and to tolerate the discomfort of learning and experimenting as we go to move forward. And
Got
so
it.
that is a whole different mindset. So I would love for people to unlearn the idea that there is a tidy formula that's going to work like ADKAR or any other.
Right. I mean, we're kind of kicking ADKAR a bit, but
We are.
there are, and that's because it's the dominant primary model. But just to say, there's a bunch of models out there that are clear, simple, articulate, and wrong.
Exactly.
And if you've got a model that feels like it's got a simplicity to it and a linearity to it, that should be your first clue that this is probably not fit for purpose, because what we're dealing with is not simple or linear. It is complex and emergent, and A won't work with B.
That's totally right. So I often think of this, of the difference between following a recipe that I can be a qualified cook, or am I going to be a chef? Now, a chef would work based on principles and knows the art and the craft of culinary arts. Personally, in my practice, what I find helpful is that people do need some guidance. So it's not that I'm flushing the whole idea of having
Right.
different techniques to hold on to, but I think change leadership is too complex to be reduced to a simple formula. We do better with guiding principles. And one of the simple kind of models that I use in terms of principles, and it is quite simple, of ABC, is to think about agency, belonging, and certainty anchors.
Nice.
And I have found these three principles work in a bunch of different circumstances. So first of all, if we think about agency, this is absolutely what executives are screaming for now. They want high agency employees.
Yeah.
The idea of self-sovereignty, of being a high agency individual who can move forward, who does not wait for permission, who can figure things out, and who has a locus of control and influence on self.
Perfect.
Like very much this kayak mentality.
I agree that it is a really fundamental, powerful unlock for change and transformation to happen. It's also deeply tricky because you can't say to somebody, "I'm now giving you agency," because that's a non-agentic statement in itself.
Yes.
So, what have you learned about what it takes to invite people to claim their agency?
Yeah, that is really interesting. I absolutely agree that regrettably, many organizational cultures are inoculation systems against agency.
Right.
So that's not cool. You can't tell people, okay, have agency, but then the minute you color a little bit out of the lines, you get clobbered over the head, or there's 26 steps of approval for every little micro step. So I think this invitation and acceptance of agency does have to come from an executive level in a first instance. And then to showcase what it looks like and that it can work, including leaders from any chair. So I'm big on this idea that leadership is always taken, not given. It's not a question of the level at which you find yourself in seniority. It's a mindset more than a skill set.
Yeah.
And one of the best things leaders can do is just spotlight as examples to say, okay, look, Jim had a problem. He didn't wait for the boss to green light a solution. He's moved things forward, and to demonstrate through social proof that this is the kind of behavior that can win here.
Yeah, I do love the idea that if you're a transformational leader, one of the things that you should be going is not what's the change project at hand, but how do I create agency capacity within our organization so that we're building something that's there. So agency feels really important. Belonging, also extremely powerful. We've interviewed Helen Bevan, who is a great champion for
Yes,
belonging for this.
she is magnificent. Yeah.
What's your take on belonging? Why is this important?
Yeah, well, I think we are dealing in an environment at the moment, as you know, that is of extremely low trust, an erosion of social fabric and sense of connection in a bunch of different spheres. And so humans are hardwired as social creatures, and we need a sense of community and belonging
Yeah,
for thriving and also for sense making. And so I think this is where belonging is really important. If we can have that sense of community, of sense of shared experience, that can be very supportive to advancing change so that we are working against the forces of fragmentation, silos, and lack of trust that are really crippling organizations today.
what are the telltale signs of belonging? Because, if I'm a skeptical person listening to this, I'm
Mhm.
going, yeah, you're going a bit woo-woo on me now. It's all about
Yes.
belonging. It's all about community. I mean, it's about shared. I mean, how do I know that there's a sense of belonging in my organization?
It's probably more evident to see when it's not there.
Right,
So I think that would be the first instinct. But I think where I see teams that have a strong sense of belonging is a sense of shared purpose, that you get a sense of mission and alignment that is fundamental. And so, for example, when I work with not-for-profit organizations that are really mission-driven, you
yeah,
see that sense of belonging that is at a heart level. This is not something that resides in the head,
right,
it's in the
right,
heart level. The other little cue that I would observe is shared language, is that you notice that some teams have a sense of shared belonging because they have key touchstone phrases or expressions that mean
right.
something to them. So they have these kind of reference codes. And then the other thing would be a level of trust. I really think that many organizational change projects are failing at the moment because there is no trust. And of course, trust is ultimately the currency of change. So, high trust teams are able to collaborate, are able to disagree and exchange ideas
Yeah,
in a respectful way. Where people feel ultimately supported in working towards some kind of progress without being stuck by perfectionism or internal politics. So, those would be some of the examples that I would think of.
yeah, they're good. It makes me want to ask you though, um, at what level do we need to create belonging? Because you've talked about both having the bigger picture, the kind of the North Star, but you've also talked quite a bit about at a team level.
Right.
Like, I mean, if I'm a transformational leader, where am I trying to inject this sense of belonging? Because my imagination is at a smaller unit,
Mm,
you've got more customization, more personalization. It's like me and my team, we can create our little subculture almost.
totally.
But sometimes that means it's disconnected from the bigger picture. If you're at the bigger picture, you're forced to generalize more, to abstract more, to jazz hands more.
Yes.
So you may have a kind of clear core, but it feels like it has less of a magnetic pull.
Hmm. That's a really great point. I think what we want to do is, first of all, think about acknowledging rather
Mm,
than negating the reality that there are going to be subcultures. That's
yeah,
totally fine. But to try to invite a perspective on what are common denominators that we can hold on to. And so that brings us actually to the certainty anchors concept,
brilliant.
because it could be that if we have a common mission or we have a clear purpose or we have a
Right.
leadership team that we're holding on to, those are shared identity pillars and shared certainty anchors that can exist. I would say on your question about how do we think about this sense of belonging, it is fundamental to start at the executive level.
Right.
I work with a lot of leadership teams that are misaligned, have low trust, and have a lack of shared meaning about the thing they want to change. And
Yeah.
unless that is attended to, then we're going to be stuck.
Got it. What else do we need to know about certainty anchors? I really love this phrase
Mm,
and the metaphor that it's kind of based on.
yes.
But what else, if I'm a transformational leader, do I need to know about what they are and what I need to do to create them?
Right. Great question. Well, I think what the fundamental first step in understanding certainty anchors is to move beyond the head and into the heart.
Right.
And so that is the gripe I have about most change communications initiatives, because they're reaching people at the wrong level. They tend to
Yeah.
be too intellectually focused and sidestep the whole aspect of
Yeah.
human sense of meaning and connection. So that would be the first step. And I think what's helpful is to establish certainty anchors at an organizational level. So it might be we adhere to these values, or this mission, or this is the meaning of our work, but also to have a sense of real affinity to certainty anchors is to invite people to reflect on their own certainty anchors.
Right.
There is something potentially patronizing in plunking over the head and telling somebody, guess what, this is a certainty anchor, good
Right.
luck with that. Where I do better is with an open palm stance of saying, okay, what have you found to be certainty anchors
Right.
that help stabilize in an era of white water, which could be for somebody, it could be their family, their yoga practice, whatever those things may be, which is personally relevant and then also links organizationally.
What I'm taking from this, and one of the things I'm taking from it, is actually having a kind of cohesive leadership group is a certainty anchor.
Yes,
And without that cohesion at that top upper level, there's such a fundamental certainty anchor that's missing that it makes change difficult for the rest of that organization.
exactly.
Because I feel the dance in this conversation between creating certainty and direction, C-suite, bigger goal, but also creating agency and emergence within as part of the process that's coming through that.
Yeah, exactly.
Carolyn, to shift just a little bit,
Mhm.
your origin story is
Yes.
in communications with change. And I don't remember when email came on board and we're like, this is so cool. We can just email people
Yes,
updates
I remember
and they'll be
this. Yes.
able to know what's going on.
Yes.
And nowadays, everybody's going, I've just got too much of everything. I've got too many
Yes.
texts, too many DMs, too much TikTok, too much Netflix, too much email. Like I am besieged by communication.
Exactly.
How do you find ways of telling people what's going on?
Mm. This is a great question. And actually, this is such a beautiful example back to the first part of our conversation that the world has changed. And
Yeah.
one of the ways in which it's changed is from the day that I also recall that email was an event and everyone would pay attention. And now the number of people who just have a reflex to delete their all staff emails is extraordinary to me,
Yeah.
because we're living in an age of information overwhelm and permanent partial concentration. You notice this everywhere you go. And so this becomes an enormous problem in terms of communicating change. So I think the first thing is that leaders in particular have to be very attentive that the attention, focus, and energy of their employees is their most important asset, and
Right.
they should use it with caution.
Yeah.
What I would say is that there is a tendency. It seems that we've gotten pretty good at making things worse, because if people don't understand the change, well, then we send more email and we send
Right.
more newsletters, and then there's more noise.
Kind of like the tragedy of the commons, which is like, you know what, there's too much communication. I'll try and out-communicate everybody else. And that
Exactly.
just destroys the everything. Yeah.
Totally, that's right. So I think to be very mindful of clarity of signal so that there's that fidelity of signal across the organization, which is only going to happen if we can basically prune the business and get rid of some of the noise.
Right.
And I often will tell leaders, you are the traffic. If you complain that there's too much noise, too many emails, guess what, my friend, you seem to send a lot of
Yeah.
emails and noise. And so maybe the first thing is to get out of your own way. The other thing is generally the simplest way to elevate performance of change communication is to move from information dissemination to sense making. And so we can't just keep pounding on these words that we're doing modernization and modernization is wonderful when nobody knows what you're saying.
Right.
And so just shift gears and think about, okay, how do we have conversations that help people make sense of this is going to do a lot better. And generally, from a tactical perspective, The best change communication channels are those that are based in conversation, because conversation is the smallest unit of change, as opposed to one-way direction. And so there is no email that is ever, ever, ever going to solve your change communication problem because it's not reaching people at the right level.
Right.
We do better with town halls or team meetings where people can wrestle through concepts and make sense of them and then write it down in as few words to have a muscular, brief statement of intent.
We're not stuck in traffic. We are the traffic. So stop making more traffic. Start making more sense. What an awesome, forthright, delightful conversation this was. Thanks for loving us up here at Change Signal. However you want to show us some love, we will take it. Reviews, referrals, passing on your favorite episode, hiring me for a keynote talk. It's all juicy goodness. Thanks for doing the work. I'm glad you're here.